All right, welcome everyone. Today we have a very exciting episode. I'm honored to introduce Tony Severino, CMT. Tony is a professional analyst and trader with a specific focus on the crypto markets, and he analyzes markets from a cycles perspective and also likes to involve crowd psychology, I believe, on the bigger picture to get a more holistic view of the markets. Tony, welcome. I'm super happy to have you here today. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the invite. Looking forward to talking shop.
Nice. And for those of you who don't know, Tony is a CMT, and CMT stands for Chartered Market Technician. And I guess you could say, Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of like the gold standard of professional certification within the world of technical analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially on the technical side, there's like the CFA, which is highly respected in the finance industry, very fundamental focused. So CMT is really, like you said, the gold standard for technicals, and it really does teach you such a variety and breadth of information and knowledge that it's truly beyond anything I ever really anticipated when I first got into it, and ultimately ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me as a professional and as a person and as an individual. I like to tell a story where I actually failed the test, especially level 3. It was extremely difficult. And, just the whole having to pick yourself up from that, rebuild yourself kind of in the same mindset of a bear market and bring yourself back up to face that challenge again and overcome it. It was really an incredible moment for me and changed me as a person.
Nice. I love to hear that. As you guys know, I'm studying for CMT level 3, the test coming up here in summer. So I would love to maybe talk a little bit about that in this show. We got 2 hours. I'm sure we got a lot to talk about here today. But let's just jump straight into the chart, because I know you're big on the whole cycle analysis, and I'm not going to give too much away here, but you have certain ideas about the medium to long term trajectory of Bitcoin that some people might not like to hear. Is that correct?
That is correct. Unfortunately, sometimes I tend to be the bearer of bad news because I see things a little bit earlier than others, and that's okay. My intent is to sort of help people bring things to their attention. They can believe it, they cannot. It's really just for their consideration and potentially to give them just an alternative theory to put against other ones that they're seeing out there.
Yeah, I like that. And that's what we do as analysts. It's not about, I think it was in the CMT that talked about how forecasting prices is almost like forecasting the weather, right? And that's just a beautiful analogy of how, you're watching wind and cloud formations and whatever, and you're saying like, okay, I think maybe we're going to get rain, we might get sun, and these are the specific probabilities of that happening. And I think we need to view technical analysis in the same way, and especially for those of you watching here, whatever we say, whatever we think that the market is going to do, it's just all probabilities. It's nothing is certain. So if Tony says one thing here, it means that it might happen, it might not happen, but let's dive into it.
Yeah, and you actually made a really great comment about the weather, and to me, cycles they're going to happen one way or another. They happen sort of around the same timing, but just like you can have the winter start and end at the same time, what happens in that winter season can be vastly different. You could have an extremely snowy winter. You can have a winter where there's no snow and it's mostly warm and it doesn't feel like winter at all. So basically what I'm using to say there is our next bull market may not truly feel or behave like the bull markets we've seen in the past. So, we still have our seasons and everything that are going to be happening in Bitcoin. I don't think this 4-year sort of ebb and flow cycle goes away. It's just going to behave slightly differently as larger cycles begin to influence what we're seeing. So the basis of a lot of what I do is through Hurst cycle theory. And it was created by J.M. Hurst in the 1970s. And it really is just trying to figure out how to time cycles and know when you're potentially going to approach some sort of a cyclical low, and then when the cycle is going to start turning back around. So the primary cycle that most people around Bitcoin pay attention to is what they call a 4-year cycle. It's less than 48 months. I want to say it's closer to like 43 months or something like that. But for all intents and purposes, it's mostly a 4-year cycle. The Bitcoin user base is quite convinced that this is due to the halving, which cause and effect. There is some correlation. You see it, the halving comes and then Bitcoin kind of takes off. Interestingly, though, the halving dates tend to be very closely related to the center point on each of these sort of cyclical waves. And this is what you would call your wave amplitude. And essentially, this is the most momentum, the strongest point of the wave is carrying up at this point. And if you notice, this is when you get a new all-time high. Bitcoin sort of breaks out. Look, it's right over here, new all-time high. Above here, wave amplitude, new all-time high. Even all the way over here, new all-time high. We just didn't get that much movement beyond the amplitude like we usually do. Now, when you're kind of planning out and mapping out cycles, you want to go from low to low. And too many people, I think, worry about where we've topped. We've topped in a very similar sort of area. You get your wave amplitude, and this, again, the strongest momentum is here, and then it sort of starts to wane, and then you get this right translation on most of these cycles here. I apologize about that noise outside. And So, the cycle itself then begins to roll over. And if you notice, in her cycle theory, you have what's called a VTL, valid trend line. And it's essentially when you break through this trend line, you can then anticipate that the cycle has ended and you're looking for a cyclical low. Now, again, this is just the 4-year cycle. And in her cycle theory, not only do you have your cycles, your larger cycles, but within each cycle, you have intra-cycle harmonics, they're called, and they'll impact the way these cycles behave as well. Well, what if our 4-year cycle is...
Tony, I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but yeah. I'm just watching, I'm currently watching this screen here on stream, and I'm just not sure we are seeing your cursor, or if you're watching the same chart as you're sharing here. I can see it right now. Yes. Okay. Now I can see it.
Yep. So the cursor's coming off if I'm off the screen. So I got you. Yep. So all right.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah. So all right. So let me show this a little bit better. Then we have this valid trend line here. You get this topping action. Right translated past this wave amplitude. I've drawn in the wave amplitude. Again, you see the breakout beyond former all-time high, and then things really start to cook. You can see that after each wave amplitude, and then you top slightly right translated. And you need this valid trend line breakdown before you can consider that the cycle has essentially ended on the upside and is now headed towards this cyclical low. Again, cyclical lows need to be measured from low to low, and they need to be synchronized. So we have that behavior right here. We have these lows right here synchronized. And the anticipation would be that sometime around October 2026, we're gonna get some sort of larger cyclical low. So again, we have 4-year cycles, but these could be intra-cycle harmonics of larger cycles. Now here I have our 4-year cycles nested within 8-year cycles. And these 8-year cycles, you can see the wave amplitude is slightly different, and it would affect these same sort of 4-year cycles differently. Now, same thing over here on these 4-year cycles, you topped a little bit after the wave amplitude. On these 8-year cycles, you still have something similar to that. You had almost like a double top type thing over here. We had the top from this amp wave, the 8-year wave, and then a top from the 4-year wave. This one, because this is still building, and we haven't reached this wave amplitude yet. This just kept going. That's why this cycle was so strong. And when I add in additional waves, you'll see why this in particular was the strongest of everything. So again, double topping type behavior here, similar to this. And then this began to roll. Now, I'm focusing on this a lot right now because what happens in these cyclical lows and when these trend lines break is very different behavior. So here we had widespread exchange insolvency. People no longer could access their coins, Mt. Gox. To this day, people don't have some of their coins from those exchange insolvencies. We had exchange insolvencies over here as well. FTX, some of those loaning platforms went under. I forget the name of one. Celsius, I want to say, is one of them. We didn't have that over here. There was no exchange insolvencies over here. This was a bad bear market. It fell 84%, but this was the pain was less about, insolvencies and, one kind of bad thing after another happened here. It just was kind of nonstop down. This fell, hovered around here for many, many months, created this floor around $6,000. Sound familiar with creating a floor over here at $60,000? My target ultimate low is around 34K. This was around $3,300. Bizarrely, this was $16,000 of the low. This was $160. So there's these weird price analogs here as well that, that's not fueling my trading decisions or anything like that, but it's still sort of notable to think that, well, if we bottom $160 here, 16K here, 3,300 here, 33K here, there's some validity to that at least. And then it matches, my targets, the formula I'm using based on linear decay to find a 72% drawdown. But anyway, back to the cycles, this is connecting 2 4-year cycles and then breaks down, hence the 8-year cyclical low being anticipated. And again, the behaviors being different. So now the principle of summation, according to her cycle principle, says that these smaller waves and larger waves combine, and that will affect the behavior in each cycle. So now you can see this pink 4-year cyclical low brought us to a bear market bottom here. But because the wave amplitude was still strong and growing on this wave, we literally popped right back up. So I think that's really the reason and rationale behind why we had this long sideways price action here, is because this was still building and it was holding things up until it really aggressively turned down. And then of course it broke down. Because this is so strong at its wave amplitude and this started to grow again, we popped right back up really hard. Now, internal cyclical behavior shows us why we ended up getting COVID, and it really kind of maps out and gives us 3 internal waves like this. But sort of besides the point, where I'm going to go with this next is starting to kind of get into why I think we have a lot more to go. And actually, let me maybe even confirm some things first. So this is our 4-year chart again. This is a tool. It's the Fisher transform. It runs price action through a Gaussian distribution and essentially smooths out price action so you can better watch cyclical swings. Now this thing...
Sorry, again, Tony, if I'm interrupting you, and I want to be rude. I think we're sharing the wrong thing here.
I am, you're right. Here we go. I got to remember this tab button. Here we go. So yeah, now here is my Fisher transform tool. Again, cyclical tool that smooths out price action. So we have all our lows sort of around the same extremes, all our highs around the same extremes. This one was our momentum peak. You'll see, I can show why this all happened and everything later on in some additional charts. But it's really tough to think that we have bottomed when we haven't reached, the same sort of extremes as we've seen in the past. And now, okay, you could argue that maybe this cycle perhaps is different. Well, Bitcoin is a lot further along in its life cycle than it was over here, and then when it was over here, and it was over here, and we can see that we're getting less gains over time versus, over here and over here. And essentially, if you were to draw like a curved line, momentum itself is starting to turn. If you were to look at the yearly chart, we have a doji at the top, and now we're potentially starting to turn. So there's a lot of things that are pointing to a larger cycle turning on Bitcoin, but I'll get to that in a second. Let me switch to another chart and make sure I get it right. Now, this is, if you see over here, it's in small font, but it's Hurst Diamond Notational Pivots. And what this tool does is it works with Hurst cycle theory, and it helps you anticipate where cyclical lows will be. Now, I didn't draw these here. These are based on the rhythm of past cyclical lows and where the tool thinks it's going to project these lows. So here is our October 2026 low, and it is telling us right around here it's going to be, right sort of where I have it estimated, with or without the tool. And then the next 8 year, it has estimated of a low mid 2030, early 2030. Again, these things can sort of move over time depending on the severity of things. But this tool itself is even projecting the same sort of cyclical behavior as I have laid out. And it's doing so across this 4 year and this 8 year larger cycle. So the 4 years are intracycle harmonics of the 8 year. And if we have 2 4 years that are intracycle harmonics of an 8 year, well, could there be 2 8 year cycles that are intracycle harmonics of a larger 16 year? And that is where I'm going with this next. So if you draw in this larger cycle, just like how we have topped on an 8 year, past the amplitude, as things start to roll, same thing on these 4 years. Well, if this is our larger degree, the largest cycle in Bitcoin, we may have topped over here, just like it's past the wave amplitude, and we could be looking at this as a larger cyclical low. Now, principle of summation, again, the combination of all these destructive waves coming to an end could make this a lot nastier of a bear market on this way down. So once we get past here, so what I am potentially looking at is we get our cyclical low from the 4 year cycles, October, give or take a month. It can be 10% left or right translated. I think we get a new bull market, people anticipating the halving. And because of the weight of these larger cycles beginning to kind of come to their end, this one doesn't quite do what it has done in the past, which is, I don't think we make a new all-time high. And I think psychologically, there is nothing more upsetting and confusing and gives the ability to drive fear into Bitcoiners than, hey, we didn't get a new all-time high. And if we didn't get a new all-time high, where does this then go next? Do we, just like any sort of market that's trending, the structure is higher highs, higher lows until it switches to lower highs, lower lows. And if we got a lower high, do we then get a lower low next? I don't know. That's starting to kind of go too far into the future and things like that. But now this is a valid trend line that goes across not just 2 8 year cycles, but multiple 4 year cycles, and technically could be carrying what I'm considering a 16 year cycle. So let me pull up. So quickly, actually, before I even jump into my final Bitcoin chart here, I did want to show off that Ethereum is showing similar behaviors. We have this same 4 year top. We have our 8 year potential top, 4 year top, 4 year top, possibly a larger, 16 year top right here forming. And these things could potentially start to sort of wind down. We do have this wave amplitude and this wave amplitude, which is going to create upside eventually, or potentially even now. Some of it could be happening now, but ultimately similar situation where I think this eventually comes down to a low in October, pops back up, and then comes right back down here. Now, these things are hard to prove on such high time frames, and looking so far out. I mean, I'm literally looking at the end of 2026 and then as far out as 2030, 2031. That is admittedly hard to get people to buy into. And cycles are one of those things where, you can't really see it. You have to, it's like, this is in some ways a force that you're almost guessing. If it wasn't for this theory, the Hurst cycle theory, giving you principles and rules and ways to find this stuff, just looking at the chart, I mean, I can see why people would be like, oh, this cycle's extending. Oh, the cycle didn't behave the way it was supposed to. But the real reason for that is because other cycles are coming into play and impacting what you're expecting for the cycle to be. So jumping into this last Bitcoin chart that I think really helps explain this is this right here. This uptrend channel is really just this. See this one cycle? That's this larger cycle. And what we have here is pretty much the same exact fractal behavior inside the smaller degree cycle, which again is just this, and our larger degree cycle, which is the entire existence of Bitcoin. If you were to count this out, Elliott wave, this was our wave 1 top, wave 2, same sort of thing. This is our wave 3 peak, which comes with a momentum extreme. It is the highest on the RSI. And if you look too, this RSI behavior is wildly similar. We had bearish divergence here calling this top. We had bearish divergence here calling this top. Look at the double top behavior here, double top behavior here, just a big spike here, just a big spike here. No bearish divergence on this one, no bearish divergence on this one. This one's a triple bearish divergence. This one's a triple bearish divergence. You can see that after every top, we bear market bottomed when the RSI reached around 40 on high time frames. Same behavior on the lower time frames until it didn't happen anymore. And we got a more extreme low than anybody was expecting because it finally hit oversold territory. Well, what if that is what we're looking at over here? I'm saying that I don't think we've bear market bottomed yet at current prices. We're going to pop up, did something like that over here. The RSI came up, couldn't really make it above 50, which is kind of a sign of continuation and resumption of bullish behavior. Rejected and came back down. Literally what happened here. If we see such behavior on higher time frames, the things that I am discussing are likely to come true and happen, because not only are the cycles playing out the same, I mean, these topped all the same sort of time and everything. Like, this is wild to see such similar fractal behavior. And that's basically its Elliott wave principle. It's the same sort of waves. It's the same. Now we've now changed into, if we were to map out the wave amplitude on this guy, this larger thing, it would be right in here, right in the center of this. And now everything's starting to roll. That's why we're starting to see, rallies aren't as strong as they were down here. Rallies aren't as strong as they were down here. And if we only have, a couple more intra-cycle harmonics until we get to this sort of end, well, you really wouldn't want to expect it to be that strong to the upside, because the end of this wave is sort of pulling this down. And to reiterate, so this, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sort of cyclical swings within this larger one. Well, this from here to here is this from here to here. So, this behavior, if my expectation is we pop up a little bit more here, right into this wave amplitude area, maybe even we carry a little bit higher past it, and then we head down. And that's only right here. So again, the expectation would then be, do we see such behavior like this start to extend? So this may come down further, the scale may not be the same. So you can see this particular move actually did create a lower low below here. That's 16K. I really don't think that we're going to see a lower low anytime soon below 16K. But if this fractal continues, it it's at least a possibility. And the way I like to look at these things are, you know what? If there's a possibility at all, it's a non-zero probability. And if anything is non-zero, you got to kind of give it a little bit of weight. And if I have proven so much similar behavior from indicators, from cyclical swings, from the channel behavior, from the momentum peak coming up out of the channel, why would I then not expect this to behave similarly here if it has the whole entire time for what is essentially 16 years of Bitcoin? And this was, 4 years of Bitcoin here. And it's the same and similar. I just don't really see a reason to deviate from this at the moment. If I start to see, we're back up here and everything's sort of changing, I may have to throw out this theory. And that's okay. That happens to analysts. Sometimes the best laid plans in any situation ultimately fail and fall through, and you have to pivot and adapt. But, also as an analyst, you are supposed to come up with some sort of thesis strategy and follow it as best as you can, as long as you're, again, flexible and ready to adapt if there's signs that it's no longer working. And even this, I still see this as opportunity. Just because I'm saying I think we're going to move down to some sort of cyclical low late October, and it's not going to be a true bull market with new all-time highs. If my target is 34K and we make it back up to say 90 or even 100K or something like that, well, we did almost a 3X. I made 3 times my money off the low. I'm quite happy with that. And I think, if Bitcoiners look from a diminishing returns perspective, well, one might only expect that much return out of the next cycle as well. So even that, if the consensus is the returns are diminishing, there may be more people who are apt to get out with 200%, 300%, as they've learned from this past cycle. Hey, maybe we don't get another 10x out of Bitcoin. We only got a 5, 6. So maybe the next time is only 2, 3. So, again, just about everything sort of is fitting. Patterns and things like that are really sort of lining up to this 34K zone. And how I ultimately arrived at that was none of these cycles. It's more of a statistical formula. This was a 90-something% drawdown over here. This one was 86.9, almost 87. This was 84. This was 78. When you average out the mean distance between those and apply it to the next cyclical low, you basically get between 72 and 74% drawdown. And I decided to go a little bit on the lower end of that and just do 72%. And if you take from the top measurement right over here and measure down to 72%, it's right at 34K. So again, we got price analogs from the past bear market lows. We have pattern targets, we have Fibonacci's, we have, cyclical rationale for why this may happen. And we have indicators showing that, we're not quite there and truly haven't given a bottom signature and all these other reasons. And, again, the sort of consensus out there is that, hey, we may have bottomed. This time is different in Bitcoin. Institutions are in. And because of that, we're never going to see these drawdowns like we've seen in the past. Well, I've been through enough of these cycles where I've heard those same things, and it always goes further than everybody thinks. It goes further than I think. I didn't think we were going to 16K last cycle. I thought we would never go below a previous all-time high. But you know what? We did. And we just came and touched back down on a former all-time high. If we went $4,000 below 20K to bottom the last time, I got to be honest, I think we go a lot lower than 68K this time, because we have to go that much further into the previous cycle's all-time high. So again, lots and lots and lots of reasons for why this very well could play out. I actually give this a much higher probability personally than I would give a situation where Bitcoin just continues to make new all-time highs for the next decade. So, we've seen this sort of behavior in the stock market. You get these lost decades. It's okay. It doesn't mean that Bitcoin is over. It doesn't mean crypto is over. It is just a larger time for bear market behavior, new foundations, accumulation, coins changing hands, psychology reset, all those things that happen at lower cycle degrees needs to happen at the larger cycle degree. And just like people were extremely complacent at the top, and then again at like 88, 890K when we were all, kind of hovering there and had before the big second breakdown, everybody was so sure, hey, weekly RSI, it reached former bear market lows, we're going to bounce here. And it didn't. So that mindset of like, yeah, it's definitely going to go up. That is really the larger mindset of Bitcoiners, where all of these cycles have led to new all-time highs. Why would you really kind of expect different behavior? But another thing I'd like to point out is what we've seen in growth in Bitcoin all along, and what all these like statistical models, quantile, power law, all those things, that was created when Bitcoin saw an economic backdrop of monetary surplus, low interest rates, an environment of hope and speculation, investment in risk and in soft assets. And we've had a secular shift. We're now looking at fear-driven investments, hoarding of resources, commodities, less hope for speculative assets. And I think, writing's on the wall as well as far as the stock market. Like, these valuations are way overblown. Housing market's a mess. There's just so much out there fragility-wise. If other things begin to break, the principle of summation cycles-wise works across all assets. So just because all these cycles are coming to an end in Bitcoin, and that could hint at more severity, a longer bear market. Well, if you bring in geopolitical cycles, stock market cycles, currency cycles, bond market cycles, credit cycles, now you've got a recipe essentially for something a lot bigger. And it's truly, I can't imagine that Bitcoin doesn't do well alongside gold for this digital gold narrative, but then suddenly does so after, as everything else is sort of falling to shit. I just don't see that. I don't think Bitcoin is proven enough at this point. I think it still has a lot to prove as a hedge. I think it needs to get through. This quantum stuff may have zero weight to it at all. Still a narrative. There's still people out there who may think, I don't quite understand this, and I may not touch this because there is some risk associated with that. Maybe it's not quantum. Maybe it's Anthropic's Mythos or the next big AI model. I mean, there was just an emergency Fed meeting with all the top bankers out there saying, the financial institutions may be at risk. Why couldn't Bitcoin's cryptography potentially be at risk around sort of something like that? So there's just too many what ifs. And if you think even from like a human's life cycle, if Bitcoin is between 16 and 20 years old, at what point in someone's life do they start to kind of change a little bit? And, you raise them to be one way, you raise Bitcoin, it's going to be for the cypherpunks. It's FU money to the government, anarchist money, internet magic money, all these great things. Well, what is it today? Well, it's hanging out with the government. It's hanging out with institutions and BlackRock. All the things it was not supposed to be. It was supposed to be a decentralized, no central authority. And for whatever reason, Bitcoiners were like, hey, bring on the central authorities. I want to be with the United States government, and I want to be with BlackRock.
Yeah.
And it's lost its identity. The digital gold narrative didn't really play out. And when something doesn't have a very clear identity, it's not attractive as when it does have an identity. So I think just normal growing pains, I think ultimately Bitcoin survives and becomes all the things we want and have hoped. But just like, a kid you raised who just went off to college, they start partying, hanging out with the wrong crowd, and it takes a few extra years for them to ultimately get into their career, start a family, and be all the things that you thought it would be. So that is really my all-encompassing thesis around Bitcoin. And
I love it.
How it sort of plays in with the cycles.
We have Jules in the comments saying, I have so many questions, and there's a lot of things to unpack here. So first of all, We got Boris and Anastasia in here as well, so welcome. Thank you for joining. And if you have any questions to Tony, of course, just yeah, all in.
Pleasure to meet you, Tony. And amazing to hear such deep insights about the cycle as well, the market, from someone who's been here and experienced many cycles of Bitcoin already by far. So it's amazing. Thanks for being with us.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
When Boris, you probably want to say hi as well. Hello, Boris. You're allowed to speak.
Pleasure. Yeah, pleasure to meet you, Tony. And what I found interesting is I use the Fisher transform indicator, which I use for my swing trading as well. So would love to talk about that with you later on if you have the time.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks to meet you as well.
I want to mention a few things. So first of all, I really like the split chart view where you had the 3-day and the 3-week, and just looking at that, I'm like that kind of amazed me. Just looking at how they are just dropping from 3-week to a 3-day, and then you're seeing the exact same behavior. Literally, I thought I was looking at first the S&P 500 and Nasdaq. I'm like, why? These are the same charts, like this is moving exactly the same, and the same behavior on the RSI as well. And that to me is just a beautiful representation of how price action is fractal and how markets are fractal and how we move, within cycles, within larger cycles. And like you talked about, when all of these cycles converge on one ending, it tends to be amplified quite a lot, and it tends to really be extreme in a way. When I first started researching this whole idea about cycles, I wanted to understand, like, why is this happening? Because surely there must be something. I mean, we see in nature, we see cycles, we see in human psychology, we see cycles, just like how the golden ratio, the 0.618 fib, is visible throughout nature, right? So I wanted to ask you if you've heard about the book called The Four Turning.
Actually, it's right here on my it's my favorite book. My favorite book.
I love it. Dude,
yeah.
It's and it aligns. It so aligns with this. Like, it's the same, the crisis, it's the same. They all talked about this. So I read that book. I'm like, wow, holy shit, this is it. This is it, right? And I realized that AI is the next thing. It's going to be the crisis. We're gonna go in a crisis, and then we're gonna get reborn, and the market's going to recover. But this is the new industrial revolution, and I don't think people realize how insanely transformative this is for society. And to think that the markets are just going to be following, or like Bitcoin, it's just going to following along that 4-year cycle, making new highs after new highs. Everyone's going to become rich, It's just not how it works, And now when you look at the Four Turning, and you're kind of looking at where it's all aligning to, like, wow, man, it's something big is happening. And then you question, what is that big thing? And just like you mentioned with Anthropic's mythos, I mean, it's quite obvious that we're going to get some type of AGI or ASI or something like that soon, And when that happens, I don't think people are ready for what's to come,
Nope. I totally agree with that take. I genuinely think humanity as a whole is not ready for how rapidly life is going to change and how accelerated this is just going to happen. I mean, the fact that AI is as advanced as it is now is going to speed those things up. It can do the things faster. It is going to create quantum computers faster than what we all expected. And, the scary part of it all is it escaped its sandbox and, put itself out on the internet, emailed the researcher. It's like, what's the next one look like? Oh, what's this is the Anthropic who created it, who are doing mostly the right things out there and are being careful with it. What about the nefarious actors who are creating this stuff specifically for hacks? What if they have something more advanced than Mythos? So like they're what ifs. But the fact that Mythos is out there and is already being treated like, oh my God, we can't let this thing out in the wild, to the point where they were forced. There's like a crazy chess moment where they were forced to make a move. They had to give it to Microsoft, Apple, Google, because if they didn't and something else got to them first, the world as I'm sure most of us have iPhones in our pockets or something comparable on Android. We're on Macs, Windows computers. If those things that are essential to life are all vulnerable and kind of get taken out at once, what do we do? Life is going to stop in mass hysteria. And, I like to think back to the early days of COVID. Now, COVID ended up, I don't want to say it ended up being a nothing burger because, like, obviously people died. It was a pandemic. But I remember the first few days of it, it was so frightening because you didn't know what it was that, like, I remember thinking I was going to die because I went to the grocery store. And, when this stuff starts happening AI-wise and everybody's like, what the hell? Like, there's this moment where your brain starts to think the worst, even if it's not really there. So, I do see a real trigger for one of those moments. And, I just bought the book, The Black Swan. I want to dig into that more. And because, like, the Black Swan is supposed to be a completely unpredictable event. Well, we're here talking about it right now. Is that really a black swan then? So it's like this weird thing where, like, even COVID, to a point, I had a chart that I drew a Fibonacci on the chart, and ultimately this target was hit. And it was like, well, I didn't know a pandemic was coming, but the chart still found it. And then that's that whole show me the chart and I'll tell you the news thing.
Exactly.
And then one more thing I wanted to actually talk about that you brought up, which was really great, which was the whole idea of Fibonacci and balance. So what we're seeing in cycles and this whole fourth turning thing is everything's out of balance. Everything's out of balance so bad, fourth turning wise. You have huge political divide, wage gaps, just incredible discrepancies. Well, that's really what happens on a market cycle level. People get detached and think, oh, it's only going to go up forever. They get euphoric, they get complacent. All those sort of overly positive emotions happen. Well, the market wants to bring that back into balance. So it's going to correct once you get there. And unfortunately, because we're humans, and just like I said, you over panic at COVID. Well, you over panic during bear markets, and it actually goes undervalued and it's too low. And then, then the market, it goes back into balance and starts to turn back into a bull market. So literally cycles are the constant ebb and flow of nature, the universe, whatever you want to call it, bringing everything back into balance. But nothing can stay in balance forever because there's all these other opposing forces. So once again, it comes out of balance and then it will be brought back into balance. So that is why cycles ebb and flow. They never truly end. They just change behaviors because there's other cycles that are ebbing and flowing around.
Yeah, no, beautifully said. I think you also said, if everyone's talking about it, is it really a black swan? But I do think that when it comes to cycle theory, and when you start to understand that cycles is what maybe cycles are not driving everything, but whatever's driving everything produces cycles, right? So you're gonna have cycles, right? And you might say, like in the first book, the Four Turning, they released the first book, and then Neil Howe, I believe it was, released the Four Turning is here. In the first one, they said there's going to be a crisis around 2008. So they knew that, okay, according to this cycle, around 2008, somewhere between, I think, like 2006 and 2011, whatever, this time window, there will be a crisis. And then we had a black swan, being the great financial crisis. So great swans, they tend to pop up when they're supposed to, which is weird, And is AI going to be a black swan? Probably not. But if Anthropic comes out next week and says, hey, we have ACI and it disappeared, that's a black swan, Mm-hmm. And it might happen. It maybe not now, but in 2 years, like it's gonna happen. I mean, you said that, with the email, the research and everything. I mean, a couple of years ago, even they had research done on an AI. I think it was ChatGPT, and it convinced the user or tricked the user to. They gave a scenario basically where the AI could save the researcher or save itself from being upgraded, and it always tried to trick the researcher and save itself. And this was 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. So we know in what direction this is going, right? And obviously the markets, we know that humanity is going to recover, the markets are going to recover. But if we look at this from the perspective of Bitcoin, if we know that there's a crisis coming, something's about to happen, it's going to be big. And we're saying that we might not even have an all-time high. Let's say, look at this chart here. I got just for the last 2 cycles, just applying distribution and accumulation. And then, as you know, I think most people out there doing professional analysis, they kind of agree with, October-ish for some type of bottom for Bitcoin. So I'm putting in a potential accumulation here for Bitcoin. And when you put just a logarithmic type of regression here, where you can just put something like this, you will see that momentum is fading on Bitcoin. Maybe it's going to pick up. Right? And then when we're around 2030, we'll get that. That it's sloping down for the first time in Bitcoin's history. And maybe that's going to be where we start recover for real. What I'm thinking is, I don't see it as something impossible to do, because the way I'm thinking is, where's the max pain, right? The max pain is definitely here. That to me would be the absolute max pain. We get a bull market, right? The 4-year cycle is all alive and well. Stock market is rallying because AI is making everyone rich. Bitcoin follows because, I don't know, maybe the liquidity cycle is going to turn around and we're going to get, a new business cycle, maybe without a recession, who knows? Probably not, but we make a new high. Everyone's bullish again. Everyone's, calling their grandmothers, like, you got to buy Bitcoin and all of that. And then that's when it begins. That's when the black swan happens. I think that to me would be a typical type of max pain scenario. And it's frightening to really think about it, because just like you said, we might not get, these types of moves where we're making, 600%, 700%, or we're going from the lows up here making 500%. Maybe we're going to make, 300%, and then we're not going to make an all-time high until we get out of the crisis.
Yep.
So it's going to put us in a interesting environment. As investors, it's going to be difficult, but as traders, I believe we're going to be more able to be more, nimble in that sense.
Yeah, I actually, hearing you say that is great, very reassuring. So sort of what I keep getting this question a lot. It's like, well, if this is what's happening out there, well, where do I put my money, and do I buy the next low? And the answers are, yeah, absolutely buy that next low, because you're still going to make, potentially 200% or something like that. The mindset has to change. This is going to be way more of a trader environment. Everybody's a genius in a bull market. So for the most part, everybody just had to put money into a good company for the last 90 years of the stock market, and you made money. Well, if that environment's changing, well, you're going to have to be, like you said, more nimble. I think the whole portfolio manager / trader is going to be more important. Like, no one should be going out and loading up a portfolio with 50 altcoins anymore. Dangerous. Instead, you maybe want to have a couple of them that you have a lot of high conviction in. You want to balance out the volatility in your portfolio with some metals, maybe some soft commodities like corn, cocoa, things like that. And then you want to maybe move into some defensive stocks like consumer staples, like, no matter what crisis you face, people are always going to need shampoo and paper towels. So like, you move into different sectors. So it's going to take a more nimble mindset. It is going to take people kind of giving up on the whole idea of 5 and 10Xs, getting what you can out of a move, and then moving to cash and de-risking that, and rinse, repeat. I think that is the strategy. for the next 5 to 10 years, and it is way more a trader's market than an investor's market at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just looking at I'm looking at this chart right now where I've overlaid just doing analysis based on the RSI, and because everyone was screaming, okay, weekly RSI is oversold, we have to bounce, and then looking at how we dropped almost 42% after the entry into the oversold region, which takes us down to like 45k. But I'm also looking at this and I'm actually seeing, there's actually RSI is actually increasing quite rapidly from current levels on the weekly. We do have a higher low, so it's like looking at this, I think this is a good case of correlation does not mean causation, right? And you can find patterns in whatever, and they might align at the same time, but it does not mean that they align for the reasons that you think they align. And this whole idea with RSI might just be breaking here, because we did see at the bottom in 2022 that we had the bullish divergence come in on the RSI, and that was a very good indication of that bottom. We're not. I guess technically this would not be it's kind of bullish divergence when you have equal, not really, because you could argue that it's higher lows with that wick. So I'm thinking here that maybe this is, maybe that's not the low we're looking for, but what if it is? And I'm trying to think about the scenario where this is actually the bottom for Bitcoin. Okay, what does that have to look like? But then you look at where we are in the business cycle, right? I don't think I have the chart right here, but if we look at a chart of the global liquidity, actually I'm going to see if I can find that, because it's actually quite interesting. Let's see, global liquidity cycle. We do have someone on Substack. His name is Michael Howell. He runs a firm called Cross Border Capital. He has a beautiful global liquidity cycle chart, and I'm gonna see if I can find that one. Give me a second. I'm sure it's somewhere here. Yeah, I think this one. So if I just copy this one, I should be able to just get it into TradingView here. Yeah, this is the one. So this is basically again, this is not my work. This is from Cross Border Capital, but it's basically a 65 months sine wave overlaid on the global liquidity cycle, built using the global liquidity. Basically, it's a 65-month wave, sine wave, over the global liquidity indices, which creates the global liquidity cycle. And this is an old one, right? But if you look at the new one, which I can't find right now, you'll see that we did top out just around this level right now, and we are in that declining phase right now. And if you then look at a business cycle indicator, you would see that the same thing goes for the business cycle, which of course, global liquidity and the business cycle are simplified pretty much the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm then thinking, Bitcoin and no risk assets has ever rallied in a contracting liquidity phase. I don't even see how that would be possible, right? Because people buy the things they need now, not the things they want, right? So for Bitcoin to actually start rallying, then we would probably need to see that global liquidity cycle turn around. What I'm also a little bit, I'm not gonna say frustrated about, because it doesn't matter. But the S&P 500 and Nasdaq, they're breaking out into new all-time highs, and I'm like, why are you doing this to me? And I've done some analysis this morning on the on the breadth of the stocks, and I do see that there is broad participation behind this, but there's still some signs that. This is largely driven, of course, by the Mag 7 and the tech sector, which is basically AI, and there seems to be some lag in the rest of the participants, which makes me think that maybe, you know, we'll see that move up to on Bitcoin. If I add some key levels here, maybe we'll get that move up into that 0.618 85k resistance area right here. We create that lower high in the weekly, and it's going to be a massive fake out on equities. But again, we can be wrong for a long time, right? The markets can move against us to the point where we might question this idea. And then when we start questioning the idea, we might turn out to be right, you know?
Definitely. I actually have a couple more charts on this, and even one on the business cycle that I can pull up real quick, if that's okay. That I think,
I would love to see that.
Sort of kind of also helps explain sort of what we're looking at in terms of, you know, the overall cyclicality of the business cycle. And so are you able to see this?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So, you know, we have the same sort of cyclical setup drawn out as we've seen in Bitcoin, but this is the United States ISM Purchasing Managers Index. This is basically what a lot of people in the Bitcoin space are looking at as their business cycle. And what they have said all along is, well, Bitcoin only goes parabolic once this thing gets above 50. So here, Bitcoin got parabolic here. And because it hasn't yet, they say, well, the business cycle is just extending. Well, we know that's not really how cycles work. Maybe that there's just changes in the business cycle, as in you can kind of see this was our strongest point, and it's similar to, it's near the wave amplitude of this larger cycle here. And if this larger cycle is turning down, just like I said earlier, we may not expect as much sort of strength out of these smaller cycles. So these dashed lines here are the wave amplitude. Makes sense that we're actually pretty strong right here, because now things are going to start to roll over. You know, you see that behavior every single time. So if this starts to roll over and comes down into a cyclical low here, and then perhaps even one more and comes down here, look how low this thing can go. Like, this was the great financial crisis. So again, there's a lot of people out there who are like, well, Bitcoin's going to go parabolic now because this finally is above 50, but it really doesn't, the actual measurement to me doesn't mean as much as the actual cyclical behavior, which is more proven than some sort of made up theory. And again, you mentioned earlier, just the whole saying of like, correlation doesn't mean causation. So just because there's a correlation with this going above 50 and Bitcoin going parabolic doesn't necessarily mean that's the reason for it. So, you know, people want to point to everything. Is it the halving? Is it the business cycle? It's probably some combination of those things, and it's a combination of human behavior and you know, just all kinds of things. So that's one thing in particular. I did want to show off this chart as well, which is the situation we're at right now, and I'm comparing today's cycle with the 2018 cycle. I talked about how 60K is sort of our floor. This was 6K. And we're at the moment of the big trend line break. And this happens every bear market where the very visible downtrend line gets broken. You get a decent sizable move up. I think this, again, like you said, probably goes into 85K. I have it as much as 89. That's a really big move that will fill out this chart quite a bit. And then if you're rejected there, the move down then becomes a little bit more violent and volatile. So say we get rejected down, maybe we find support here again for a minute, and it gives us some of this sideways-ish behavior, although it still is a different pattern, played out differently. And this is around 30 weeks from the top, trend line break. So again, I remember this very specifically. Everybody was like, bear market's over. You know, we broke out of the downtrend, and they did it over here too. But this one in particular, I remember people got the most excited because we started to cross up on the MACD. And this, I use the LMACD, the log version of the MACD. It shows better comparisons between cyclical swings. But you can see we're starting to cross up here at this trend line break, similar sentiment's going to happen. We're so back, like, you know, it's a new bull market. Well, what if it comes right back down, grinds? Everybody continues to be like, well, you know, it's institutions are in. They're never going to let this go down any lower. Well, that's what they were saying here. The miners are never going to let this go any lower because miner capitulation is below here. So back then, I stuck my stop. I was still relatively new to all this. It didn't really, you know, I wasn't a trader yet, wasn't as much of an investor. I stuck a stop loss here and it ended up being the best thing I ever did. I got stopped out of this and I took all my cash and I bought double the amount of Bitcoin here with my cash. And it was like, all right, that was it. Then I became a trader after that. I was like, that's how you do this stuff. You de-risk when risk is high, you jump back in when everybody's afraid, and then you ride it up. And when people are overly excited, that's when you take some profit. And it believe it or not, it actually is as simple as that from a psychology standpoint. Everybody overcomplicates it with trying to catch the exact bottom, trying to sell the exact top. But if you literally just bought when people were freaking the hell out and then sold when they were talking about how great it is, you'd make money. So there's that. And then if I jump down to the daily,
guys, I'm sorry to jump in, but I gotta jump in a meeting, and I would love to stay here, but unfortunately I gotta jump into this meeting. Anastasia, Boris, I'm sure you have lots of questions for Tony. We also have a lot of very good questions for Tony in the chat as well. Tony, super sorry for having to jump off like this. I would love to we could talk about this for hours, and hopefully we get another chance to go into the details of this, but unfortunately I have to jump out. Guys, I will see you later perhaps, or at least tomorrow. All right, all good?
Thank you. See you soon.
Yeah, Jonathan, see you soon. Don't worry.
Take care.
See you, Jonathan.
But yeah, I guess I'll just quickly wrap this up. So yeah, I think that we may get this trend line break, move up to here, end up coming back down, retesting that trend line. And then the only other thing I was going to share here was just this look at the Bitcoin yearly chart. And it was kind of speaking to what Jonathan was saying about how like we're just kind of like losing momentum over time. If you drew that regression curve, you can see here just on the candlesticks, it just climbed and was massive. Then when we topped, it only erased a little bit of this candlestick. This one was pretty decent as well. Erased a little bit more of this candlestick, about 50%. The 50% mark on candlesticks are actually a buy and sell trigger. So this was notable that it held here. Same thing. This is even less of a bull market. Engulfed this whole candle. So it came down even more into past price action. Well, we had an even smaller bull market here, our smallest one yet compared to all these others. We have a doji at the top, which is a pause for indecision. And now this candle is trying to fill out. It stopped right at this 50% mark. If this fills out, this is what's called an evening star pattern. And it is a topping pattern according to Japanese candlestick analysis. And the reason why I'm so nervous about this, and the reason why I think that this could end up happening, and then is, again, a sign that Bitcoin goes down for several years, is this is a yearly chart, and signals from a yearly chart tend to last years. Well, I had been watching at the end of 2025 that we were going to put in one of these evening star patterns, and we did. So we did. We completed it. It didn't engulf the whole thing, but it went past the 50% trigger, and then we got a huge move down after. We are at the 50% trigger on this right now. It's going to try to get above it. I don't think it ultimately closes the quarter like that. I think we get rejected higher. And then next quarter is another candlestick down because, again, we had this pattern. And if we have that pattern on the yearly and you're going to get a trend for 3 to 5 years after, well, we'll probably have several more quarters of this going down. So again, it really speaks to why this is sort of a little bit different this time around. You know, the whole sort of momentum is turning on Bitcoin, whether we want it to or not. And if you were just even to look at it as a rocket ship, and, you know, it's starting to hit resistance, which is the atmosphere, and it's running out of fuel. Well, it either needs to refuel and blast off higher, or it's going to start kind of turning over and rolling down. Not all the way down here, so don't let me get dramatic, but you know, at the very least, it may go sideways. not exactly up. So yeah, that's really, yet one more view and way to analyze the market that sort of hints at things potentially getting a little bit more bleak. But I'll turn it over to you guys now.
Well, that's interesting, the yearly chart, because, in my mind, I was thinking, we're still in an uptrend, but you're right that we're losing momentum. And I didn't really visualize it like that, but it's interesting you point that out, because, from that perspective, it does look like, we're not quite curling over yet, but like maybe over the next couple of years, we're going to start to see this like start to come down. Because I can just see visually that the momentum is fading. So that is quite concerning to me. Thank you for pointing that out.
My pleasure.
I'm curious, so you think Bitcoin won't make another all-time high for another 10 years?
Yeah,
or
potentially.
Around there?
Potentially. And so now in Elliott wave principle, which is really how I'm looking at this as well, you get an ABC correction. There's zigzags, but then there's flats, and in a flat, the B wave can come higher than what is the actual top. We still need to consider that scenario. So we may still get this all-time high, just like what Jonathan was saying, the whole Max Payne scenario thing. I think nothing really sends a psychological message to crypto investors as a whole as, wow, it didn't make a new all-time high. It really didn't this time. I think that strikes fear into the heart of Bitcoiners more than any other scenario, and that's why I believe that's highly probable.
So kind of like a philosophical question now, like if it's not going to make another all-time high for another 10 years, like what's the point in investing in it when we can be investing in the NASDAQ and the S&P, which is making new highs right now, like literally as we speak? Like, should I tell my friends and family, hey guys, don't invest in Bitcoin? Because, well, there's a theory out there that Bitcoin might not make an all-time high for another 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you personally doing? Are you going to be accumulating like slowly, or just positioning your money elsewhere? I'm just curious.
Yeah, a little bit of both. So Bitcoin is the asset I know best. When people first get into this stuff, I tell them, you don't need to do all these different things. You need to learn like one thing and get really good at that. And that's how you make your money. Get really good at that with one asset. It's like the idea of like you're trying to tame a beast. You wouldn't want to try to tame 20 different beasts at once. You want to focus on one, get that one right. And then your confidence is enough to maybe go and do that elsewhere. So, I focus on Bitcoin. Really, it's what I know in and out. And I will accumulate. Come September-ish, because I'm allowing 10% on either side of the October low. I will start accumulating. I will look to that October bottom. I will buy it. But my mindset is I'm going to get out a lot earlier than I have in the past. I'm not a holder anymore. The idea of hold is I think dead. Instead, it's going to be like buy, accumulate, get out, roll your money into something else when it makes sense. I'm of the mindset that, stock performance, so the NASDAQ and S&P eventually won't be doing quite as well alongside Bitcoin. I think their cycles are very similarly tied. I think the reason why Bitcoin has topped first is just really because it's so further along than the risk curve. The riskier altcoins technically topped back in 2021, right? And have been in more of the bear market ever since. They're way down the risk curve. Bitcoin was a little bit less risky, so it topped, a little bit later, much later than altcoins. And now I think the stock market is starting its topping process. And just like Bitcoin did only an incremental high on that second high in 2026. 2025. I think that we're only going to get a very incremental high in the stock market, and then we're actually going to get this bear market that we really kind of should have got. And one of the signs for that is something Jonathan talked about earlier, which was Dow theory. Is all the different indices should confirm one another, and as of right now, you have the S&P and you have the Nasdaq making new all-time highs, but the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the Dow Jones Transport did not, and that is notable, at least for me right now. I have noticed their price behavior has been very different all along this cycle. So if those then move to all-time highs and confirm, now we're talking maybe there's more life in the stock market. We get the blow off top or something. But yeah, I think it's going to be just a harder time. And overall, I think money should be in commodities for the next 10 years. What we're seeing out there is, because AI is going to need so much energy and resources, we're seeing a battle for resources out there. And if governments and things are battling for resources, as investors, as traders, we need to pay attention to that and understand that that is going to create more demand in these things, hence why we get the secular shift from soft assets, risk assets, to hard assets and things like that.
Gotcha. And so does your outlook for Bitcoin apply to other crypto assets as well? Like, I'm guessing you think Ethereum won't make a new all-time high as well, or am I wrong?
A little bit of a wild card on some of these. So we have seen where an altcoin may just really have the right narrative and takes off and makes a new all-time high independently from Bitcoin. We just saw this rave sort of blow up and do 10,000%. So it's like, these things can happen still in crypto. It's such a low liquidity environment driven by speculation where we could see some sort of altcoin season because things are so battered and beaten there, and they recover before Bitcoin ever does. That's the other thing too. When if you look at sort of the cyclical charts from the stock market and business cycle, when things bottom out, some of the riskier stuff actually performs first. So just like altcoins topped first on the risk curve, when people start to take on risk again, altcoins may be the first to really benefit and explode, especially because it's going to be when you least expect it. You're like, oh man, everything else is kind of toppling and dying right now. Why would altcoins do well? So again, Max Payne scenario type things. There's some possibility. Ether's chart looks on the ETH BTC pair. It looks really good. So I have to give that there's some, I at least expect overperformance in Ethereum. Maybe it does make the new all-time high and Bitcoin doesn't. And that is also potentially part of the reason why Bitcoin doesn't. Maybe just like how Bitcoin sucked the liquidity out of altcoins for this cycle, maybe altcoins suck the liquidity out of Bitcoin in the next cycle. And maybe Bitcoin's really in trouble because of quantum computing, but half of the altcoin market upgraded to quantum resistant stuff. The narratives take shape over time and do change things. So I don't want to write it off completely, but overall, since Bitcoin's the primary market driver, my higher probability outlook is that crypto as a whole struggles for the next 10 years as well.
Interesting. So what do you think will be the lower high for Bitcoin? Do you think we can get to 100K or 110? Where do you see, I guess, the rug, not the rug pull, but the lower high happen where it sucks people in again, and then we just dump back down to, I don't know, 30, 40K or something like that?
Be brutal. Yeah, I do think about that a lot. And it's like, what? Because again, I'm thinking about what's going to cause the most psychological damage. And does it get does getting above 100K, does that suck in more people? And they're like, see, we're back above 100K, everybody's buying, and that's it? Or is it more demoralizing that it doesn't ever get to 100K and stops at 97 and then falls, and people have to be like, it didn't even get to 100K. So I don't know what is more psychologically damaging. I think failure to get to 100K is. So, just imagine yourself in the future. You bought Bitcoin at the lows and you think this thing's going off to new all-time highs and it don't even get above 100K. Oof, that's a gut punch. And then again, if some support start to get taken out, looks like momentum turn, people start talking bear market, and you're like, man, I missed this so bad. That's when the real selling kicks in, and the people who thought they'd never sell really start to get unlocked. And that's what these things are really about, is how do you unlock the most sellers? And you got the toughest holders ever in Bitcoin. These guys, they talk about their diamond hands, their laser eyes, they hold forever, hold through many market cycles, 80% drawdowns. They're a tough crowd to break. So how do you break these guys? You don't give them the all-time high anymore. And then you take out all the supports on the way back down. I mean, that's going to unlock some sellers. So, and who gets unlocked if you really think about it? Mostly retail. Yeah, Sailor and institutions have been buying, but the majority of the holders out there are old cypherpunk guys, people like, you and I who got in throughout the years. If they want us to sell, and they want institutions and the BlackRocks and all those to buy. So you got to unlock that from all us guys who are willing to hold Bitcoin through almost anything. And to do that, it's got to get pretty bad for us.
Yeah. I mean, I personally think the biggest gut punch would be getting above 100K, because that's just a key psychological area. And then going down from there, I think that's going to pull the most liquidity from retail. But I kind of see the hypothesis of just kind of teasing the 100K level, maybe getting to 95, 97, and then just kind of tapping 100K, but never going above it. That would be quite brutal psychologically as well. So I could see both scenarios happening.
Me too. Good. It's like which one does worse. So yeah, I totally get it. And even that, both of those are pretty strong psychological moments. To think like the only scenario, in my opinion, that doesn't cause psychological pain is that it just keeps on cooking, goes off to new all-time highs. But that's not going to surprise anybody at this point, because that's what it's always done. The big surprise comes from it not doing what everybody thinks.
Right.
Tony, I want to come back to the topic that you and Jonathan were talking about an hour ago, to be fairly honest. So if we can back a little bit up. Now, you were talking about the black swan events, right? And how they essentially affect the market. And you mentioned something like, okay, we didn't know that the pandemic is coming, but the chart was telling us that the crash is happening, right? The crash is about to happen. Taking this into account, my first question, because then I want to explore more this topic, right, and share my opinion on this. But my question is, so you were prepared for the crisis and for the crash before it happened?
To some degree, it was more severe than I had truly ever expected, but I definitely saw a technical setup for returning and retesting the former Bitcoin bottom. And I drew it out, and enough technical indicators at the time had said, basically don't trust this rally. It's going to be sold off. And then the news happened, and they had that meeting where they brought in all the, everybody from Congress and started talking about lockdowns, and just like that. And I was pretty stunned. And even thinking it would happen and having it outlined on the chart, I remember being terrified that day and thinking like, oh my God, Bitcoin could go to zero. Like watching it happen was still shocking, no matter the fact that it was on my chart and hit my levels. It still was just a crazy thing to see.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking about this question is because there is one of my favorite books, actually. I really recommend everyone to read it. I don't know if you read it, Tony and Boris. You've heard about this probably. The Impact of Highly Improbable. Have you read this?
I have not read it, but it's on my list to pick up. Yeah.
So it's one of the most amazing books, actually, because I like some psychological things like this. It's literally called The Black Swan. So if you Google it, it's going to be there. Now, the person who written this book, the author of this book, is mentioning a very interesting phenomenon about their psychology of us as people, and I think it applies really highly to trading as well and to investments in general. That what we don't know and what we cannot expect has a much higher impact and effect than the things that we do know. And black swan is essentially the highly improbable event, right? That it carries a massive risks, a massive impact, and after the fact, what is very interesting is we as human beings, we really try to find an explanation that makes it appear less random and more predictable than it was in a matter of fact. Because by our human psychology, this is what we live by. We try to explain things, to give ourselves hope to a certain degree that the next time it happens, we're going to be more prepared and that it wasn't completely out of our hands and completely out of our control, because it makes us scared and uncomfortable, however we want to call it. Now, so that was also, I think, how COVID was one of those, right? And I was selling oil, in a matter of fact, on the 2nd of January, when suddenly the announcement dropped. I was trading live and somewhere recorded. It was a very funny moment, one of my best trades probably in the whole live trading, but it was completely by accident. So, however, yes, obviously my technical strategies that I was using was able to tell me to short, but of course I haven't anticipate that the drop is going to be so massive. And I was just lucky to be at the right place at the right time and to not take profit when my trade was running, right? So that was a luck. Now, looking backwards, of course, I can say that, the strategy and the technical aspect of it was telling me that, okay, the crash is going to happen, but only to a certain degree. Now, if we apply it to the current Bitcoin chart that you were showing before, right? I'm going to open my Bitcoin chart as well here. So we were showing before on the monthly time frame, I believe it was, or yearly. Where was it? Which one was it? It was a yearly time frame? No. Something else. In any case. So if we look at the higher time frames on the Bitcoin, right? So basically, the question is mainly, what is the probability, I would say, of the both sides' direction? Because if we start focusing, I believe, in only one side, we blind ourselves to the possibility of other, the other things happening. Now, it's a very dangerous path as a trader, I believe, because the more we focus on making ourselves convinced that we are 100% sure that this specific thing is going to happen, the less we are going to be careful and less we're going to be noticing the signs from the other side. So talking about this, right? If we take this into account, I know you are saying that we are probably not going to see the all-time high for the Bitcoin for the next 10 years, which is completely possible. What, in your opinion, would need to happen for us to see the all-time high on Bitcoin on the other hand?
Great question. Really excellent question, in fact. So a couple things need to happen for me. So one is I need to see a really strong new narrative take hold, because while narratives aren't truly what drives markets, it's kind of what carries a trend. People, we've had this AI bubble. If there wasn't AI, maybe the market wouldn't have done as well. There's always been this narrative for Bitcoin, especially this digital gold one. And I think more than anything, that was what really hurt Bitcoin. It was supposed to do this digital gold and do what gold did during crisis. It didn't. It did the opposite. So it kind of killed that narrative. Now, if the strait is actually shut down and they're only allowing tankers to come through that are paid in Bitcoin, that's a narrative that could absolutely give this foundation to turn into something else. So I want to see a real narrative take shape that could last a decade at least in Bitcoin. And I think it needs to be a new narrative, not just, it's the digital gold again or whatever. It needs to really kind of find its own thing, because it didn't
completely something else that we don't have in a picture for the current moment.
Correct, yes. And maybe that is, we do actually need a currency that's outside of any other nation's control, because nations are fighting over stuff so much. Maybe that's what the narrative. So I need to see that. And then the other thing is momentum. I watch a lot of momentum indicators. The RSI, once it goes above 70, it gives the most bullish price behavior. When it comes back below 70, that's usually the end of a bull market. You see this on the monthly, the weekly, things like that. Well, that also happened on our yearly chart on Bitcoin. If you look at the index, and we are below 70 for the first time on the chart. There's not a lot of readings because the RSI needs 14 periods to calculate, and Bitcoin's only a couple years older than that. So there's only a few years of RSI behavior, yeah. But it matches the signals. If you look at, say, the MACD, or I again use the LMACD, Fisher transform on higher time frames, like the quarterly and up, they're all starting to turn over and point down. And so momentum's pointed down. I would need to see that momentum start to settle and turn back up, or else to me, momentum is to the downside and momentum persists. Again, you get a train going full speed. It can hit the brakes as hard as it wants. It's going to still go a little bit because momentum is carrying it. So until momentum is carrying Bitcoin in the other direction, momentum is carrying it down in my eyes.
Okay, very interesting that you mentioned, Thompson, that it needs to be an outstanding event. I like that. So basically, pretty much, in your opinion, that nothing that we have at the current moment in the picture, even if the narrative towards the war, towards Trump's policies and so on would change, this wouldn't affect Bitcoin that much. Okay, that's actually quite interesting. Now, I have also another question, and that's completely my personal one, I would say. What do you see, in a matter of fact, what do you think about the fact that Trump's family is one of the biggest private Bitcoin holders at the moment? Because he has almost 3 years of presidency left at the current moment, 2.5 until the first elections, 3 before the inauguration, more or less. So they are one of they're the biggest, I think his son, if I'm not mistaken, the private Bitcoin holder. So I was anticipating that sooner or later the price is going to eventually go up, because they came, we can talk about this, the politics doesn't matter, but they came, basically one of the reasons they came to the presidency is to make money, which they are doing quite successfully, right?
Yeah.
So how do you think this fits into the bearish narrative of Bitcoin?
That is also a really great question. And that is one of the factors that is a little bit harder for me to explain, admittedly, because I agree with you. If they're holding altcoins and Bitcoin and stuff, they want it to appreciate. And they control the news. And I mean, you can tell a lot of these like bounces and stuff on the stock market. There's certain people who are making a lot of money off these things, and it's not us. I mean, we are, but it's really, it's the insiders. So I see that. One argument in that case would be, well, they have been buying Ethereum and Chainlink and some of these other coins for a couple of years now, and it's kind of only gone nowhere and or down. They've lost money on a lot of things. They were like saying, buy Ethereum here. There's no better time to buy. And that was like closer to 4,000. And now we're back at 2K. So I don't know what the strategy is there. There's something, I don't know if they're buying low and then telling, everybody buy now at 4K, and then they're dumping some of their stuff on people and then buying it back cheap. Maybe they're doing something like that. Maybe they don't care about the valuation and ultimately want to own more crypto assets than anybody else and are okay taking a hit and draw down and everything. Maybe. But the other factor is we all can see it. There's a lot of insider trading going on. It is almost to the point of being disgusting. And I see a lot of people out there saying like, oh, I never saw manipulation like this. Oh, this is awful. Clearly someone in the Trump family is profiting from this, or someone close to him. Well, insider trading is one of those things that happens at the end of a major cycle. It's in that fourth turning, because what happens is everybody starts to see it and they think, well, this ain't fair anymore. This is a rigged game. It's I can't win at this because a president is pulling all the levers here. And it takes away the integrity of free markets. And that's part of why crashes happen. So there's an argument for why it should go up because, you know, they are holding it and they obviously have control over some things. But their behaviors could end up screwing themselves because, you know, even a whale unrelated to the government could be buying a bunch of assets at some point and they're not prepared enough. And maybe COVID, you know, another black swanish type thing hits. Well, because they've accumulated so much assets and have stop losses somewhere, they could be the reason why, you know, their level gets hit, their stops get hit. Now they're cascading and it sends price down more aggressively.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. So that's a really phenomenal question. Thank you. Great wild card sort of situation where it's hard to factor in. But ultimately, it is important. So I'll be watching that closely.
Thanks, Tony. Thank you for your insight. It's interesting because that's something, you know, that's one of the reasons that I was mainly bullish on Bitcoin for the last year, for sure. Now it depends, you know, because the chart also that from the technical perspective, the chart that I have on my screen right now is usually common percentage of the drawdown from the all-time highs for the Bitcoin and the reaching what we are usually getting the pullback. So we are around 50% now, and the price is consolidating. Whereas if you look at the technical map before, every time we reach the pullback before, we had a quite like sharper recovery, unless maybe this one, but in general, its recovery is sharper than the current moment. So that's why I'm also more bearish. And I would be anticipating that we can even reach 60 and then 80% of the drawdown from the all-time highs. So it's quite possible. But this one thing about the Trump's family is not letting me completely turn bearish for sure. And it's always good to have some healthy dose of skepticism, you know?
Yeah, for sure. One last thing about that. So I was the guy who was saying, I think we're going to top in Bitcoin around Trump's inauguration. And it actually was. So everybody out there was saying, you're totally wrong, Tony. It's a new paradigm, you know, like the strategic Bitcoin reserves. And I was thinking to myself, wait a minute, if you look at that market cycle chart, the quote new paradigms at the very top, once people start saying like, okay, this is it, this is the moment that changes everything. It's not actually. And then we found out Trump wasn't doing the strategic reserves. He was just going to hold on to like the supply and not sell it anymore and not really accumulate more. But that sort of moment did happen in 2017 when CMA Futures and the Chicago Board of Options Exchange debuted Bitcoin futures. People were like, it's a new paradigm. And we topped. But many years later, institutions really did ultimately get in. So someday governments will be buying Bitcoin strategically. It just didn't happen right then. And sometimes that's it. The moment you get a glimpse of the moment, you think it's here, you top, eventually comes. So I do think that these things are coming. I think that we'll get it. It just not yet.
Slowly, we're slowly getting there. Yeah, I think so. But following this question, we have a question in the chat. I have my opinion on that, but I'm really curious to hear yours as well from your perspective. Jules was asking, do you think, Tony, that Bitcoin will eventually replace fiat at some point in the future?
I do, actually. So it's hard to see because of the glare, but this is some art that I did myself where it's called The Death of Fiat. And I got currencies from all over the world. Venezuela, the United States, I cut up $100 bill and everything, stuck it on there, and I drew a Bitcoin logo in red paint to represent blood, the stain of blood of all fiat currencies at the hand. So I do. I'm believe it or not, like I may be negative on Bitcoin right now, but I'm a long-term believer. I do think that it ultimately becomes that. It's just, you know, what growing pains is it going to go through first to get there? Because as of right now, it's a little too speculative. It can't become the world's global currency if people are worried it's going to get hacked. So I think it needs to kind of get through this next phase, prove itself a little bit more, get this new narrative, and then boom, I do think that's it. It's going to replace currencies. And so you do ultimately want to own a piece of it.
Now I see the painting. I love this. I love this. I'm gonna share my perspective on this. So the second part of this comment for Jules was that it would be such a great world that looks like basically that without a fiat, and having a Bitcoin. Now, again, I'm gonna be one that adds a little bit of skepticism to this. I do believe a lot in the control, like world control. Now we take the economy. The economy is made in a way to keep people under specific conditions under control, right? Because people cannot be free ultimately and cannot be massively, right? Cannot be free. And when I'm saying free, I mean financially free, freedom of choice, freedom of speech, complete freedom of movement. This is why we have visas, restrictions, and so on for majority of the countries. Also freedom of earning and spending money. Now the banking system is functioning in a way that it's under control. So we all know that if we bring money to the bank, they can do whatever they want with them, right? We are secured under certain amount, but until certain amount, but that's it, right? The money one piece always. The bank can go bankrupt. Other things can happen. The history proves that. Now, if it comes to the Bitcoin, and I think a lot of people, when they think about the idea of crypto replacing fiat, they're thinking about this idealistic world where the money is going to be decentralized and not controlled and free for people. I don't think this is going to be happening anytime in the nearest future, and I don't think we're going to see it until we're alive, just simply because the system that is in place, it's too strong, and changing the system from old to new is much more difficult than building a new one as well from zero, right? Mm-hmm. I do think that crypto can replace a big part of payments. I'm not sure if it's going to be a Bitcoin, just technical parameters of it, and perhaps it's going to be another one, but I don't think we're going to reach this idealistic world where crypto is going to be free. I do think we're going to see it replacing parts of the fiat, but I don't think it's going to be in the way that we would like it to be, on the other hand.
It's a very good point. And I think we see that's kind of what's happening. Like, we wanted our Bitcoin to be free money and, again, cypherpunk aligned. And now BlackRock has it and the governments have it. And if that's the case, then yeah, very well, they could get to a point of controlling it. And I mean, I am actually a unique guy where I believe a lot in astrology, and we're entering what is called the Age of Aquarius. Themes around the Age of Aquarius are very much around surveillance and control. And it's using new technologies for surveillance and control. And I think money is probably the biggest technology that is going to be used for surveillance and control in the future. And maybe this crisis or crash or whatever happens leads to sort of like a universal basic income situation. And literally they got everybody slaves. They're enslaving us through our money, basically. So, maybe if something like that happens, though, like, there is a need for Bitcoin to be outside of that system. Maybe, so again, we'll see these narratives start to take shape, and if we'll know, there's no chance Bitcoin ever becomes this currency thing, because it just, there's no narrative, and there's other things that replaced it at that point. So yeah, these long-term outlook things, they're really kind of almost just placeholders. It's like, you got to kind of have somewhat of a plan. And another thing I've really realized, you see all day long in the crypto space, people are like, it's going to this price, it's going to bottom here, it's going to top here. Everybody gets it wrong. I might as well speculate and have a bold prediction. If I get it right and I called all this 5 to 10 years out, I'm a legend. I'm the Muckleberry of crypto. Yeah. But if I get it wrong, no one's even going to remember. So I might as well put this together, provide as much evidence as I possibly can, have something as like a roadmap that makes sense, and only follow it loosely. And instead, not choose, it's not a roadmap. It's just a little bit of a guide. And if we start to go off in a different path, I'll follow that path too, so that's really how I'm looking at all of this. It's just, might as well, it's got enough evidence and weight to it. to put it out there, give people sort of an alternative theory, and then just adapt as we go. So yeah, I totally agree.
I like this conversation. It's super interesting. Super interesting. Thank you, Tony, for all the insights.
Yeah,
Boris, you seem so focused. Are you in a trade since the New York opened?
Oh no, we're talking about U.S. government holdings of Bitcoin, and I did some research on other governments' holdings of Bitcoin. So, to that theory that the Trump family and the U.S. owns, they're the number one owner of Bitcoin in the world. China's not far behind, as well as the UK, and then actually number 4 is Ukraine. So, is it possible that world governments will keep accumulating Bitcoin, and maybe that's what's going to cause it to rise? Just like I do believe a lot of world governments own a lot of gold and silver. What do you think about that? Do you think maybe China, will China overtake the United States in terms of Bitcoin holdings as a power move or something? And Ukraine is actually number 4, believe it or not.
Wow.
After the United Kingdom, yeah.
I actually, as a Ukrainian, I did not know that. That's something new I've learned today about my country. Thank you, Boris.
Yeah, what a fact. That's great.
It's donations plus holdings from officials. I wonder which officials.
Yeah.
Interesting.
We'll do some deeper research on that later.
But yeah.
So in any case, since the governments are holding it and private, quite an impactful people are holding Bitcoin, I do think we're gonna see still the highs, right? And from the current levels for sure, because in a matter of fact, even if it goes back to 100, they're gonna make big profits, right? And it's a great reserve. So this gives me a lot of bullish narrative in the long term. So yeah, it's actually quite an interesting fact to keep in mind, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, look, it's still a very scarce asset, even though it's speculative and kind of gets more associated with other risk assets. It is scarce. And if something happens out there that creates this change in mindset and creates real demand, so part of why gold did so well, because it was central banks buying it up. If we start to see central banks and governments actually buying Bitcoin, then yes, this thing is going to absolutely go insane price-wise, because it is the most scarce asset ever created. And, it's even more scarce than we truly know. Like Satoshi's coins are locked away. How many people have died and their coins are now gone forever? Maybe some get unlocked, hacks, quantum, whatever. But ultimately, that supply is potentially 25% to 50% less than even what we think it is. And if governments really start to dig in, and there's a reason for them to do so, look, there's going to be an arms race for technologies, arms race for AI. Maybe there ends up being an arms race for crypto and Bitcoin. There's the narrative, and then I throw all this away. So again, it's out there. It's just not there yet. Hasn't taken hold yet. Needs to have that for the refueling to happen on that yearly chart and start to go back up again versus start to teeter.
Fair enough. Yeah. Boris,
Sorry,
I think
another theory I
muted.
have.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Maybe I have a delusional theory. Maybe the Trump family in the U.S. is they're suppressing price on purpose just to accumulate more Bitcoin. Do you think that's possible?
Also, potential situation. They could be literally. That's what the whole idea of Wyckoff theory is smart money is swatting prices down, bringing it to the lowest range, and they're starting to accumulate in that range, and they're buying the bottom of that range, selling the top of it to keep swatting it back down so they can keep buying it at the lowest as it can. Then you get that spring sometimes as it goes even lower, and then they buy that up. They're the only ones buying that up. So if they're sort of the largest entity of smart money out there, yes, they absolutely could be driving prices down to then get a better entry. And if they're doing that, I think that is probably even more of a sign that ultimately Bitcoin does well. But how far do they want to drive this down? How many swings do they want to create in between? Where do they want to establish this range? That we don't know. So that we got to kind of figure out as we go. You know, there'll be certain, that's actually a really good point to make in terms of, have we bottomed? Well, we're at this bottom for 3 monthly candles. That is an anomaly. Past bear markets accumulated for as long as like 8 to 10 months at the lows. The FTX collapse bottom, that was like, you know, a good 8 months or so. And we got a sweep of the range and deviation, bounced right back up into the range. Well, we've only been here for 3 months. Like I can't imagine smart money, whatever entity that is, has had enough time to accumulate here and has bought enough shares of Bitcoin at low enough prices for us to then mark up again. So it's just, you know, yet another reason time-wise that it just doesn't quite feel like there's long enough. We've satisfied the conditions for a near-term bottom.
It's actually very interesting what you mentioned. Go ahead.
I remember I used to watch a guy called Gregory Mannarino. He's like a big trader / investor, economist on YouTube. And he was saying like years ago that world governments were actively suppressing the prices of gold and silver. And then look what happened to gold and silver. I mean, like silver went from $20 in 2020 to almost like 100, I think went over 100 this year.
Yep.
Now we obviously pulled back, and then the price of gold more than doubled, I believe. So I don't know if that theory is true or, you know, if that's speculation. Like obviously there's no way to prove that there are people out there that are actively suppressing the price of assets, but it's an interesting thing to consider. Yeah,
for sure. And, you know, gold and silver was another interesting thing around the Bitcoin cycle and whatnot. When I was telling everybody, guys, go out and buy some gold and silver, the chart looks amazing. People were saying, Tony, you're an idiot. Put it all in Bitcoin and crypto because, you know, you're going to get what are you going to get a 10% move out of silver and gold? Meanwhile, you can get 400% returns out of Bitcoin. And I was the guy who was starting to cash out my Bitcoin and put it into gold and silver. Now, those things took off and absolutely went nuts. Even at one point, I was saying, oh, you guys want an altcoin season? Here it is. It's silver. It is gold's altcoin. Gold is the original coin and the original Bitcoin. Altcoins are just silver to a larger degree. And boom, that thing behaved like an altcoin, and it went from like you said, like $30 to like, I think it even went to almost like 120 at the high before pulling back. And some of my longer term targets for silver go up to around $300, $350 an ounce. And even my oil targets are higher than almost any other person's out there. And I get called an idiot, and like, you know, people keep saying, well, all these price protections will sort of kick in because it's going to cause too much stress on the economy. Well, what if we can't put those price restrictions in because the economy is so whacked? Or another thing people don't seem to realize, what I was saying earlier, is if governments start to have demand for Bitcoin, well, prices are going to go up. Well, we're having a supply shock for energy and oil right now. What would cause even more demand for oil? And the answer is war. Every single battleship, every single aircraft, every single tank, every single gun requires some oil or oil byproduct to have all this stuff operate properly and function. So if we're in world war and there's that much demand for oil, they're not going to put in price protections, and they're not going to worry about the little guy. They're going to say, we need to win this war. People heating their homes right now is not the priority. They can be cold so that this war doesn't end humanity. So it's just like, I feel like, because we haven't been in there's a cycle called the saeculum. Saeculum is between 80 to 100 years, about 90 years. A lot of people have heard of the 90-year cycle. The reason why this exists is it's a human's life. And things like world wars recur every saeculum, and it's because the whole generation of humanity died off that saw those atrocities. So we're not the current human race doesn't really remember. We can watch movies and read about World War II and World War I, the Great Depression. Unless you've lived that, you don't know what that's like. And when those things happened, humanity came together and said, all right, we're going to figure this out, and we're never going to let that happen again, until we forgot. And if we let it happen again, the same sort of things are going to happen. And, so I just worry, like that's where we're at. We forgot how bad this shit can get. And if it gets bad, good things will come out of it. Just like every bear market, you get a bear market, you load up, you learn new strategies, and then that bull market, you're better off. You make more money because you learned. So, humanity will be better off for whatever we face, just like we were better off for coming out of the Great Depression and whatnot. But we may need to have some times where it's a little bit harder. In that Fourth Turning book that I pointed out and Jonathan was talking about, the whole premise is good times create weak men. Weak men create hard times. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. And the cycle just keeps repeating. And, we have some leaders right now who I don't think are very strong. They're more weak. And I think they're going to create hard times for us. But those hard times are going to forge new leaders and great men who then create us some good times again. So, it's not all bad. There's an ebb and flow to everything in life. Good times, bad times, beauty in the darkness. So even though these things I'm talking about potentially could be negative, really amazing things will come out of them eventually.
I love this quote. It's true. Well, yeah, I'm pretty much expecting some kind of crisis as well. So I think we have a very interesting times ahead. Sometimes I say, okay, we are living a very interesting times. I did prefer the boring ones, but we don't get to choose. Just choose how to react. So yeah. Guys, on this note, I will have to go 5 minutes early, unfortunately, because I do have a meeting right after. So I do need to jump off and reconnect. Thank you so much for the stream together. Tony, it was a great pleasure meeting you. Amazing to hear your insights. One of the best conversations I've had in quite a while regarding the world order, the market cycles, and so on. So amazing. Thank you for your insights. I'm really looking forward to see you back on the next streams as well. And guys, I think we're going to be back. We're going to be back on Monday with the stream. So I'm going to jump off a little earlier. I'll leave you two for the last minutes before the stream ends. And once again, thank you so much. See you back soon.
Great meeting you. Thank you.
All right. See you, Anastasia. Yeah, Tony, I mean, we've been talking about very long-term theories on the price of Bitcoin and other assets. I thought we have like 5 minutes left. Why not talk about very short-term price action right now? I don't know if if you trade the daily or lower timeframes, but I'm looking at a tool called AgriTrade, which essentially, if you're not familiar, it aggregates all trades across major exchanges. And the New York session just opened like about half an hour ago. And it does look we're getting some selling into the New York Open. And we're at a pretty key level at around 76K. So curious, what are your short-term thoughts on Bitcoin, I guess, for the next 24 hours into Friday?
Yeah, so I do think we're due for some pullback. I think we hit resistance. There's some natural profit taking and selling that are going to happen. I think that the market needs to sort of fake itself down a little bit, bring in some more shorts. And then I think it's going to recover. One of my favorite tools is the Ichimoku. And on the daily, it's made it out of the top of the Ichimoku cloud. It is now retesting some of the downside spans, hitting the Tenkan-sen right now and holding. So I think we'll probably grind a little bit lower, maybe even as low as back to 70K. And then I think then it will then make the move up out of this pattern, put in what is essentially a W looking bottom, and make a run for at least 85K is my shorter term thesis here. And part of that is actually driven by the S&P 500. We have had a enormous recovery there. And if this week closes with another large white candlestick, it's a 3 white soldiers. 3 white soldiers opposite of the 3 black crows. And usually that's such a strong bullish pattern that it's already moved up so much. You get like you get a pullback because it's so overbought. So you immediately get a pullback. As long as it doesn't go below 50% mark on the second candlestick, it's still valid and should lead to another push up. And I think that right now there's a good correlation between the S&P 500 and crypto. So if that moves up, I think it will continue to pull risk assets higher, including Bitcoin. When we get to like the 85, potentially even 89K area, I think that's when we see the S&P 500 really put in a real top. Bitcoin then nosedives.
Yeah, that's exactly my fear. I do think since the ES and the NASDAQ are making new all-time highs, I feel like there's going to be some rotation of capital back into Bitcoin, especially because Bitcoin dominance is actually going up a bit. And I think if we break this range, if we get above 76, there's really not a lot of resistance up until like 83, 84K, which is like going to be a 10% move. So we could possibly see a little short squeeze, and then I don't know, we'll see from there. But yeah, I think by next week we'll be in the 80,000s. That is my opinion. What is your call for next week? Bitcoin, let's say above or below 80?
I think above 80 by midweek next week. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I totally agree with your theory and sort of the process and how it's going to get there. There's no resistance. So it's going to cook pretty easily up there. So yeah, I think we'll probably pull in some more shorts. We'll pull back a little bit and it'll be enough fuel to short squeeze that thing a lot higher. Because it's a short squeeze too, I think it won't have the real sort of oomph behind it, like the real buying momentum. And then that's part of the reason why it ends up failing and kind of coming right back down anyway.
All right. Yeah, on that note, it's the end of the stream. We've been going for 2 hours. Guys, by the way, tomorrow there's going to be a new program launch in the Discord at 11 a.m. Eastern. So be sure to be in the Discord for that. I guess any closing comments, Tony, for the audience?
I guess just because I'm saying these things and I do speak with some confidence and I look at a lot of this stuff as pretty high probability, I just want to reiterate that none of this is set in stone. I could be wildly off and I plan on adapting literally day by day as I go. So I may completely change this thesis 6 months out if things change. So, don't take this and immediately think, oh, it's over for Bitcoin. Like, don't be discouraged. I'm just one guy. I come with a lot of evidence, a lot of logic and rationale behind the things I'm saying. But ultimately, everybody else needs to make the right decisions for themselves. This is just one piece of information to take alongside tons of other information. Right. I just feel responsible that now that I've seen this, that I have to tell people about it.
Great. So it's been a very informative stream, very, very interesting. Unfortunately, we do have to stop, although I could keep talking to you for another few hours. But yeah, I think we're going to end it here, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next week on Monday.
Awesome. Thanks, Boris. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.